900 people died smiling. Here is how Jim Jones made them want to. Part 1, the sound. There is an audio recording that exists in the United States National Archives. It is 44 minutes and 39 seconds long. It was recorded on November 18, 1978, in a remote jungle settlement in the South American country of Guyana. The recording is sometimes called the death tape. And if you have ever heard it, you will never forget it. On that tape, you can hear a man speaking. His voice is calm, almost gentle. He is telling over 900 people that it is time to die. And the horrifying thing, the thing that will stay with you long after this video ends, is that most of them agree with him. You can hear mothers mixing poison into fruit punch and feeding it to their children. You can hear people crying, not out of resistance, but out of a kind of exhausted, broken sorrow. You can hear a woman stand up and object, and you can hear the crowd shout her down. You can hear Jim Jones tell his followers over and over that what they are doing is not suicide, that it is an act of love, an act of revolution, an act of protest against a corrupt world that never understood them. And then, one by one, they drink. 918 people died in Jonestown on November 18, 1978. It remains the largest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act until September 11, 2001. Over 300 of the dead were children. This is not a story about crazy people. This is not a story about weak people. This is not a story that could never happen again. This is a story about psychology, about the terrifying, scientifically documented ways in which an ordinary human mind can be taken apart, piece by piece, until the person it belongs to is capable of anything. My name is, and this is Psyche Exposed. Stay with me. Because understanding how Jim Jones did what he did is not just history. It is a warning. Part 2, The Man Before the Monster. James Warren Jones was born on May 13, 1931, in a tiny town called Crete, Indiana. Population, a few hundred people. Dirt roads, Depression-era poverty, a world that felt forgotten by everyone. His father was a World War I veteran damaged by the war, largely absent. His mother was a strong, ambitious woman who worked in factories to keep the family alive. She told young Jimmy from the time he could walk that he was special, that he was destined for something great. From the very beginning, Jim Jones was obsessed with two things: death and power. As a child, he would hold elaborate funerals for animals. He would gather the neighborhood kids together, give speeches over dead birds and cats, and perform rituals he invented himself. He was charismatic even then, able to hold an audience, able to make people feel that what he was saying mattered, that he mattered. He was also, from an early age, consumed by a rage at injustice. In 1940s Indiana, racial segregation was an everyday reality. Jones hated it with a genuine, burning passion. He befriended black children when no other white kids would. He visited black churches. He was drawn to communities that existed on the margins, people who had been told by the world that they did not count. This was not purely cynical. The evidence suggests that Jones genuinely believed in racial equality long before it was fashionable or safe to say so. And that genuine belief, that real human compassion, was the foundation on which everything else was built. Because you cannot manipulate people who do not trust you. And people trusted Jim Jones because in the beginning he gave them real reasons to. By his mid-20s, Jones had become a Pentecostal preacher in Indianapolis. He was extraordinary at it. He had the voice, the charisma, the physical presence. He could work a crowd into tears and then into ecstasy within minutes. He could make you feel, sitting in that church, that God himself was speaking through this thin young man with the dark eyes and the pompadour hair. He also began performing what he called faith healings. People would come forward sick, desperate, broken, and Jones would lay his hands on them and declare them healed. Cancer gone, arthritis cured, tumors removed by the power of the Holy Spirit. Most of it was theater. Jones used Confederates, people planted in the audience who pretended to be healed of conditions they had never had. But the theater worked because people desperately wanted to believe, and Jim Jones understood instinctively that the human desire to believe is one of the most powerful forces in existence. His church grew. More importantly, it integrated black and white members worshiping together in Indianapolis in the 1950s, which was genuinely radical. Jones used this as proof that his church was different, that it was righteous, that it was the one place in America where the world as it should be actually existed. He called his organization People's Temple, and for a long while, it was something close to what he claimed it was. Part 3, The psychology of recruitment. To understand how Jim Jones built his following, you need to understand who he recruited and why they came. They were not fools. They were not weak. They were not mentally ill. They were, for the most part, exactly the kind of people you would want as your neighbors. Nurses, teachers, social workers, idealistic young people who wanted to change the world. Elderly Black Americans who had spent their entire lives being told they did not matter and had finally found a community that treated them with dignity. Jones targeted people who were already looking for something. People who felt that mainstream society had failed them, and in many cases, mainstream society genuinely had. He offered them belonging, purpose, a family, a cause worth dedicating your life to. Psychologists call the first stage of cult recruitment love bombing. And Jones was one of the most skilled practitioners of love bombing in recorded history. When you first came into contact with People's Temple, you were overwhelmed with warmth. Members would seek you out, remember your name, ask about your life, your problems, your dreams. You would be invited to dinners, to events, to services. You would be made to feel, perhaps for the first time in your life, that you had found your people, that you were seen, that you were valued, that you were home. This is not a small thing. Human beings are social animals. The need to belong, the need to be part of a group that accepts and values you, is one of our deepest and most powerful drives. When someone meets that need, the emotional bond that forms is extraordinarily powerful, and Jones was very good at meeting it. He also offered practical help. People's Temple ran drug rehabilitation programs, soup kitchens, nursing homes, legal aid services. If you were poor, if you were sick, if you were in trouble with the law, People's Temple could help you. And that help was real. It created genuine gratitude, genuine loyalty. By the early 1970s, People's Temple had moved from Indiana to California, first to Ukiah, then to San Francisco and Los Angeles. Jones cultivated relationships with politicians, city officials, journalists. He was photographed with Rosalind Carter. He received civic awards. He was, to all outward appearances, one of the most respected community leaders on the West Coast. Inside People's Temple, however, something had been changing for years. Part 4, the escalation, how control tightened. There is a concept in psychology called the boiling frog, the idea is that if you put a frog in boiling water, it will immediately jump out. But if you put a frog in cool water and raise the temperature slowly, it will stay until it is dead. It cannot perceive the gradual change that is killing it. This is exactly what happened inside People's Temple. The control did not arrive all at once. It arrived slowly, over years, in increments small enough that each one seemed almost reasonable in context. And by the time members realized how hot the water had become, they were in no position to jump out. The first tool Jones used was information control. Members were discouraged from reading mainstream newspapers or watching television news. Jones told them the media was corrupt, racist, controlled by the same capitalist forces that oppressed ordinary people. If you only received information through People's Temple, you can only understand the world through People's Temple's interpretation of it. The second tool was isolation. Members were gradually encouraged to spend less time with family and friends outside the church. Then they were actively discouraged. Then family members who questioned the church were described as enemies, as agents of the corrupt outside world, as people who wanted to destroy the one community that truly cared about you. Cutting off your outside relationships was framed not as isolation, but as loyalty, as love, as commitment to the cause. The third tool was sleep deprivation. Temple meetings ran late into the night, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning. Members who worked full-time jobs were expected to attend regardless. Over months and years, chronic sleep deprivation became the baseline state of most members. And sleep deprivation, as research consistently shows, dramatically impairs critical thinking, emotional regulation, and the ability to resist social pressure. The fourth tool was food control. INSID. People's Temple, particularly in the later years, food was rationed and controlled. Members were kept at the edge of hunger. And hunger, like sleep deprivation, makes people profoundly more suggestible, more emotionally volatile, and more dependent on whoever controls their access to basic needs. The fifth tool, and perhaps the most psychologically devastating, was the public confession. Jones required members to stand up in front of the entire congregation and confess their sins, their secrets, their darkest thoughts and most shameful moments. He told them this was liberation. transparency, revolutionary honesty. What it actually was the systematic collection of psychological leverage over every single person in the room. Because once you have confessed your deepest secrets to Jim Jones owns you. If you ever step out of line, if you ever think about leaving, he can expose you. He can use what you told him in a moment of vulnerability as a weapon against you. And members knew this. They had seen it happen to others. The sixth tool was what Jones called catharsis sessions. Members who were accused of disloyalty, of speaking negatively about the church, of considering leaving, of maintaining forbidden outside relationships, were brought before the congregation and publicly humiliated. Sometimes they were beaten. Jones called it discipline. He called it love. He told the congregation that this was what a real family did. It held its members accountable. It did not let them destroy themselves with weakness. And the congregation, many of whom had themselves been through these sessions, agreed. Because agreeing was the only safe option, and because by this point, many of them had been so thoroughly conditioned that they genuinely believed it. Part 5, Jim Jones and the Darkness Inside, while he was systematically dismantling his followers' psycholo. Get your defenses, Jim Jones himself was falling apart. By the mid-1970s, Jones was addicted to prescription drugs, barbiturates, amphetamines, and a cocktail of other medications that he obtained through church-affiliated doctors. The drugs were changing him. His behavior became increasingly erratic. His sermons, which had once been masterpieces of charismatic oratory, became rambling, paranoid, sometimes incoherent. His paranoia deepened. He became convinced that enemies were everywhere. Government agents, CIA operatives, journalists, traitors within his own congregation. He began sleeping with loaded guns nearby. He installed elaborate security systems. He required his inner circle to be available to him at all hours of the day and night. He also became sexually predatory on a massive scale. He coerced both male and female members into sexual relationships, framing these encounters as spiritual experiences, as special connections, as proof of his divine nature. Members who resisted were punished. Members who complied were trapped. And yet, and this is crucial to understanding the psychology of what happened, members continued to follow him, not simply out of fear, though fear was certainly present. Many of them continued to follow him because they had invested so much of themselves in People's Temple that leaving felt impossible. Psychologists call this the sunk cost fallacy. The more you have sacrificed for something, the more time, money, relationships, and identity you have poured into it, the harder it becomes to walk away. Because walking away means admitting that everything you sacrificed was for nothing. Members had given up their savings to the church. They had cut off their families. They had moved across the country, then across the world. They had built their entire identity around being part of People's Temple. To leave was not just to leave a church. It was to lose everything, to become nothing, so they stayed. Part 6, Jonestown, the Jungle Trap. By 1977, the walls were closing in on Jim Jones. A former member named Deborah Layton had escaped People's Temple and was speaking to journalists. A devastating expose was being prepared by New West magazine. Government officials were beginning to ask questions. Jones was convinced, not entirely without reason, that People's Temple's days in California were numbered. And so he activated a plan he had been developing for years. In the jungles of Guyana, South America, People's Temple had been quietly building a settlement. Jones called it Jonestown. He told his followers it would be their promised land, a socialist utopia free from the racism and corruption of America, where they could build the world they had always dreamed of. Over the course of 1977 and 1978, more than 900 members relocated to Jonestown. Many of them went willingly, some were pressured, some were told there was no choice. What they found when they arrived was not a utopia. Jonestown was a compound carved out of dense jungle. The conditions were brutal: heat, insects, disease, inadequate food, inadequate medical care. Members worked in the fields for hours each day under the blazing Guyanese sun. At night, Jones broadcast his voice over loudspeakers that could not be turned off, delivering hours of paranoid sermons into the darkness. There was nowhere to go. The jungle surrounded them on all sides. The nearest town was miles away on dirt roads. Members had surrendered their passports to church officials. They had no money. They had no contacts in Guyana. They were, for all practical purposes, prisoners, though the bars of their prison were invisible. And Jones intensified everything. The sleep deprivation became more extreme, the food became scarcer, the punishments became more severe. Members who stepped out of line were placed in a sensory deprivation box or subjected to drug injections or forced to stand before the community and confess in the jungle heat. And then Jones introduced the White Knights. Part 7, The White Knights. Rehearsing death, the White Knights were what Jim Jones called emergency alerts. In the middle of the night, the loudspeakers would erupt. Jones's voice, frantic, urgent, terrified, would announce that enemies were coming, that the CIA was on its way, that mercenaries had been hired to destroy Jonestown and everyone in it, that the end had come. Members would be roused from their sleep and assembled in the Central Pavilion. Jones would tell them that the only way to protect their dignity, to protect their cause, to deny their enemies the satisfaction of destroying them, was to die together, voluntarily, as an act of revolutionary protest, and then the poison would be brought out, a large vat of liquid. Members would be told to drink. They would drink, and then Jones would tell them it was a test, that the poison was not real, that they had passed, that they had proven their loyalty and their courage. This happened multiple times over the months before November 18, 1978. Over and over, members drank what they believed was poison and waited to die. And then they did not die. And Jones told them they had done something beautiful. What Jones was doing, whether he fully understood it in these terms or not, was a process psychologists call systematic desensitization. He was repeatedly exposing his followers to the idea of their own death until the terror response diminished. Until dying for People's Temple began to feel not unthinkable, but familiar, even noble. By November 1978, the members of Jonestown had rehearsed their own deaths so many times that when the real moment came, many of them were psychologically prepared for it in a way that no outsider could possibly understand. Part 8, Congressman Ryan and the Point of No Return. In November 1978, United States Congressman Leo Ryan flew to Guyana. Ryan had been receiving letters from the families of Jonestown members, desperate people in California who had not heard from their loved ones in months, who were receiving strange, coached letters who feared something terrible was happening in the jungle. Ryan decided to go and see for himself. He arrived at Jonestown on November 17, 1978, accompanied by journalists, a camera crew, and congressional staff. Jones received them with forced warmth. A performance was staged. Music, dancing, a community dinner. Look how happy we are, the performance said. Look how well we live. But cracks appeared almost immediately. Several members passed notes to Ryan's team, begging to be taken out. More members came forward as the visit continued. By the time Ryan prepared to leave on November 18th, 16 members of Jonestown had asked to go with him. For Jim Jones, this was the moment everything fell apart, because those 16 people leaving meant the illusion was over. It meant the outside world would hear their stories, it meant investigations, legal proceedings, the end of everything Jones had built. It meant exposure. Jones made a decision. As Congressman Ryan's group reached the small jungle airstrip at Port Kaituma, Temple gunmen arrived on a truck. They opened fire. Congressman Leo Ryan was killed. 3 journalists were killed. 1 defecting member was killed, several others were wounded, and Jim Jones returned to Jonestown and called his congregation together for the last time. Part 9, November 18th, 1978. The recording begins with Jim Jones speaking to his congregation. His voice is tired, almost sad. He tells them that the time has come, that Congressman Ryan's group has been stopped, but that more will follow, that the enemies are coming, that Jonestown cannot survive what is about to happen. He tells them it is time for what he calls revolutionary suicide. A large metal vat is brought into the Central Pavilion. It contains grape-flavored punch mixed with cyanide, Valium, and chloral hydrate. Syringes are prepared for the children and elderly who cannot drink on their own. A woman named Christine Miller stands up. She argues with Jones. She says there must be another way. She says they could go to the Soviet Union, where Jones had been negotiating a possible relocation. She says the children should be allowed to live. Jones dismisses her. The crowd turns on her. Voices shout that she is wrong, that Jones is right, that this is the only way. Miller sits back down. The nurses begin with the children. Syringes of cyanide are squirted into small mouths. Parents hold their children as they die. Some parents, then drink the poison themselves. Some are injected by those around them. Jones repeats over and over, stop this crying, die with dignity. I tried so hard. It takes approximately 5 minutes to die from the dose of cyanide given at Jonestown. Over 900 people died in that jungle clearing. Their bodies were found lying together, many with their arms around each other, families together, friends together. Jim Jones was found with a gunshot wound to the head. Whether he shot himself or was shot by someone else has never been definitively established. He was 47 years old. Part 10, The Psychology of What Happened. In the weeks and months after Jonestown, a devastated world asked one question over and over again. How? How did this happen? How did over 900 people, ordinary, intelligent, compassionate people, end up dying in a jungle in South America at the command of one man? The easy answer is that they were brainwashed, that they were crazy. The easy answer is comforting because it creates distance. It says this could not happen to me, to people like me. The easy answer is wrong. What happened at Jonestown was the result of a systematic, years-long process of psychological manipulation that exploited the most fundamental aspects of human nature: the need to belong, the need to believe, the power of sunk cost, the effects of sleep deprivation and hunger on critical thinking, the way isolation destroys perspective, the phenomenon of groupthink in which the unanimous opinion of a group overrides an individual's own judgment and perception. Social psychologist Robert Cialdini has spent decades studying the science of influence and persuasion. The techniques Jones used, reciprocity, social proof, commitment and consistency, authority, liking, scarcity, are all documented, well-understood psychological mechanisms. Jones did not invent them. He simply deployed them with exceptional skill and without any moral restraint whatsoever. The psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton, who spent years studying thought reform and coercive persuasion, identified 8 criteria that characterize environments designed to control human thought. Jonestown met every single one of them. Every single one. And here is the most disturbing part, the most important part. The part that this channel exists to make you understand. You do not have to be in a jungle compound in Guyana for these mechanisms to work on you. They work in offices, in political movements, in online communities, in relationships. Wherever there is a charismatic figure, a sense of urgent shared identity, the suppression of outside information, and the punishment of dissent, the conditions for what happened at Jonestown begin to form. The scale is different. The outcome is different. But the psychology is the same. Part 11. They're survivors of Jonestown. Some members had been sent away from the compound on errands before November 18th. Some had managed to hide in the jungle. Some had escaped through the trees as the poison was being distributed. Odell Rhodes was one of them. He pretended to go and get a stethoscope during the mass death and slipped away into the jungle, where he hid until it was over. He spent the rest of his life trying to explain to people what it was like inside Jonestown, trying to make them understand that the people who died were not fools, were not monsters, were human beings who had been taken apart by someone who understood exactly how to do it. Deborah Layton, who had escaped months before the final day, wrote a memoir called Seductive Poison. In it, she described the experience of realizing gradually that the community she had given her life to was not what it claimed to be. The difficulty of leaving, the guilt of surviving, the impossibility of explaining to people who had not been there what it meant to love Jim Jones and to be destroyed by him at the same time. Stephen Jones, Jim Jones's own son, was away from Jonestown on November 18th, playing in a basketball tournament. He returned to find his father dead and 900 members of the only family he had ever known lying in the jungle. He has spent decades grappling publicly with what it means to be the son of Jim Jones, with the grief, with the shame, with the complexity of loving someone who turned out to be a monster. These survivors carry something that most of us will never have to carry. They carry the knowledge of what human beings are capable of, both the evil that one person can do and the extraordinary resilience that others can find in the aftermath of unimaginable loss. Part 12, the close 918 people died in Jonestown on November 18th, 1978. Their names deserve to be remembered, not as symbols of weakness or stupidity or fanaticism, as human beings, as people who wanted a better world and were willing to sacrifice everything to build it, and who were destroyed by a man who understood exactly how to turn that wanting into a weapon. Jim Jones did not succeed because his followers were weak. He succeeded because he was extraordinarily skilled at exploiting the things that make us human: our need for community, our desire for meaning, our willingness to trust someone who seems to understand us, our tendency to stay loyal to what we have already invested ourselves in, our vulnerability when we are isolated and exhausted and afraid, to the voices that tell us they alone know the truth. These are not weaknesses to be ashamed of. These are the features of human psychology. They exist in all of us. Understanding them, really understanding them, the way this channel is dedicated to helping you understand them, is the only protection we have. Because Jim Jones is dead, but the mechanisms he used are not. They are being used right now in communities and movements and relationships all over the world. Some at a small scale. Some at a scale that should frighten us. The question is not whether you are capable of being influenced. You are. We all are. The question is whether you know enough about how it works to recognize it when it begins. That is why this channel exists. That is why these stories matter. This is Psyche Exposed. If this video changed the way you think about influence, about belonging, about the darkness that can hide inside the most appealing promises, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for the next chapter. Because there are many more stories like this. 1. And understanding them is not optional. It is necessary.